Howdy and welcome to Bamberger Ranch. My name is Aldo Leopold. I'm the director of the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute, and we're going to continue our Leopold Live series here at Bamberger, continuing to talk about the 5 basic tools introduced by Aldo Leopold, the father of wildlife management. These 5 tools include cow, axe, plow, fire, and gun. And what we hope to do in the upcoming months is show you how those tools can be applied, but with very specific projects and objectives. And so with me is Dr. April Sampson. She's the executive director of Bamberger, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Bamberger and what we hope to cover in the series.
Great. Thank you so much, Roel. We're really excited to have you and your colleagues from the Natural Resources Institute back here at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve. And we're excited about continuing our journey into Leopold Live version 2. Like Roel said, we'll be providing more detail and more useful information regarding the 5 tools that Aldo Leopold championed. Here at Selah Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and our mission is landowner stewardship, outreach, and environmental education. So we have many Central Texas school children that come visit us every year for hands-on science-based environmental education lessons, and we also lead showcase tours and workshops for landowners interested in practicing restoration and good land stewardship. So we're very happy to be partnering with Natural Resources Institute, and we know that you'll benefit a lot from the information that we are going to be talking about during this new version of Leopold Live.
So let's go ahead and get started.
Great.
Today on Leopold Live, we're going to be talking to you about native grasslands and pollinators. What are pollinators? Pollinators are those animals that drink nectar and spread pollen from male plants to female plants. So when you think about pollinators, I want you to think about the bees, the butterflies, the moths, the hummingbirds, the beetles, all of those things that do the nectar to pollen transformation. And pollinators are really important because they uphold ecosystems worldwide. 80% of flowering plants are actually in need of pollinators. And when you think about us, we need pollinators because a lot of our food crops rely on that. About 75% of our food crops rely on those pollinators. So if you like apples, bananas, almonds, and coffee, you better like pollinators. So pollinators in terms of a grassland like this are going to be really, really important. This is a native range. And these native grasslands have been disappearing worldwide for a very long time. Here in the state of Texas, 3/4 of the state at one point was covered in a prairie or grassland savanna state. Due to the end of open range in the 1890s, habitat has been slowly fragmented apart. And then when you factor in things like fire suppression, overgrazing, and brush encroachment, the cycle has really gotten messed up and pollinators need our help. So what can we do about those pollinators? Well, you don't have to manage a land just like this. You can do a pollinator garden in your backyard. Pollinator gardens are a great way to just add a little bit for the guys that need it. So when you think about your neighborhood, maybe you are on this little habitat island. Maybe there's a grassland a little bit away from you and there's one on the other side of you, and you want to connect that. Well, those pollinator gardens, or just planting native flowering plants in general, can provide a nice little habitat corridor for those pollinators. It can be a really important stopover. And when you think about our migratory species, such as our hummingbirds and our monarch butterflies, the type of flower that you plant and the color of flower that you plant too can play a large role in attracting those pollinators. So it's really a game of scales. So when you think about a native range like this, these grasslands have evolved with disturbance events. And when I'm talking disturbance events, I am talking about grazing and I'm talking about fire, the natural cycles. So the natural grazers that would be coming through this area would be the bison. The natural fire cycle of this area was all over the map. We'll talk about that in a second. So why did these native ranges evolve with those disturbance events? Well, this little blue stem here, which makes up 50 to 60% of North American prairies historically, is what we call a bunch grass. And these bunch grasses grow back from the base every single year. So I can reach down right now and I can grab last year's growth. This thatch material, this is an organic material. You see how easy that is to frass and send apart? So that grass really essentially recycles its own carbon and its own nutrients to help build soil, but it needs help doing that. So when you think about the bison coming through here, not only are they eating the grass, but those hooves are helping to break that up as well as compact that thatch, that organic layer back into the soil. So that is a really, really important thing. And of course that fire is coming through this area and it's just gonna burn that thatch layer right off. But we have suppressed those fires and obviously we have gotten rid of the bison and we've brought in our own livestock. And when you do that, you have to really pay attention to how much thatch you have. Now, we can really help the pollinators out with grazing as long as we keep in mind that we have to graze correctly. You always have to understand how much forage you have on your range to support your stocking rate or your intensity. And you can do things like patch burn grazing. You can do a low density and continuous grazing, which means you would have maybe 1 or 2 animals in this pasture year round, which means you're never going to outrun your forage. Or you can do what I really prefer to do, and that is high intensity, short duration. Constantly moving your cattle, a couple acre paddocks, constantly grazing, mimicking what a herd of migrating bison would do. And if you're not gonna run livestock through these grasslands, you can burn it. Now our natural fire cycle is everywhere between 2 and 7 years. So you have to keep an eye on your fuel load. As that thatch builds up, okay, you have to be very, very careful because if you get too much fuel, when you burn it, it could very easily get out of control. So when you think about fire, you really have to keep in mind what time of year are you burning? Because here we are in the fall and all of this grass is kind of browned out. This is very, very, very good fuel and it will light up very quickly. And you can see the wind is blowing. Okay, so that fire can burn out of control very, very quickly. So again, prescribed burns, very important. Knowing when you're burning, okay, knowing how to burn, and you can refer to our previous episode of Leopold Live for that, and then knowing what the fuel load is, and also what are you going for. Here at the Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we prefer cool, creeping fires, which means we're burning the end of February, beginning of March, as things are starting to green up, but there's still enough fuel to just carry it over, really providing that new spring growth to be able to come through and shine and be nice and Irish green. But we also have some other tools that aren't just fire and grazing. We can do mechanical disturbance. When I say mechanical disturbance, I am thinking about things like disking. A light disking on an area like this, you have to keep in mind when you're disking that it depends how much soil you have and again what that thatch layer is. You're always going to be somewhere between 2 and 6 inches. Now disking is also dependent on the time of year because you have ground nesting birds. You don't want to run over those nests. You don't want to damage those eggs. So here we like to burn between second summer and first summer. That is, or I'm sorry, disc between second summer and first summer. That's right about now. Late October all the way to the end of February, beginning of March, okay? And again, somewhere between 2 and 6 inches is going to be your disc step. And as you're going through, the idea is just to break up that thatch. That's what you're going to do. And another mechanical thing you can do, which is what we do here on some of our very shallow, fragile soils, we take an old box spring mattress without the polyester on it, and we drag it behind an ATV, a UTV, a truck, or a tractor. You're just spreading out that organic material in a nice, more even layer, and you're breaking up what little soil compaction you have. Okay, so you're not going too deep. And then those tires, as we're driving around, also helps break up that thatch as well. So it's really a twofold when you shred. And you can shred and you can shred and you can shred to really help break up that organic material. But timing is very important. Knowing what grasses and what your range looks like. If you're going to do it in the fall, you don't want to scalp it. Okay? You don't want to take it all the way down to the ground. With these mechanical disturbances, you can very easily mimic overgrazing or an extreme fire very quickly, okay? That's not what we want to do because then you've essentially reset your native and you've allowed things like non-native improved grasses to move in. So when you think about those non-native improved grasses, I'm talking about Johnson grass, buffalo grass, which is a big problem down in South Texas. Your bahillas like Dallas grass, right? The list goes on and on and on. And those were planted in areas like this because they favor chemical nitrogen fertilizers, which we don't like, and they favor high intensity grazing. Now that might be good for some people, but on a native range site like this, again, we're talking about pollinators and what we can do for pollinators. This is what we want, a good mix and a good diversity of our plants and our grasses. There's a lot of forbs mixed in here. You can see, especially in the springtime when those flowers pop up, it's really important. But just looking behind me, you can see like agarita. Okay, it's February right now. Agarita is going to start flowering, really important for your pollinators, one of the first ones to open up. And as your birds start to migrate through, you have to know what your range looks like, okay? So when you think about your backyard, if you might be interested in putting a pollinator garden in your backyard, start looking about what pollinators are already there. If you don't have monarchs, it's pretty easy to know if you do or don't have monarchs, go, what can I do to help those monarch butterflies a little bit? Well, you probably want to plant one of our native milkweeds because that's the host plant. If you are missing pipevine swallowtails, you might want to plant some pipevine. And if you're trying to attract different types of bees, keep in mind that our native bees have evolved with different flowers. So if you like things like bumblebees, which are in trouble all across North America, okay, those long tubular flowers where they can really get in there and grab those pollen packets are important to have. So when you think about starting a pollinator project, the biggest decision is probably going to be your budget. Okay? Now, when you manage for pollinators, this is going to go under your habitat control for your 1D1 tax valuation. So once you have identified your budget, you really want to identify where the ideal spot to put your pollinator garden is going to be, or your pollinator-friendly plant is going to be. Once you have that done, how big is it going to be, right? And think about this too. What kind of labor and tools do you have at your disposal? You don't want to tackle a project that's just going to be too big. But you can also encourage schools and churches and your local HOAs to get involved in these pollinators as well. And everything you do, you want to make sure you keep a good annotation of so you can put that in your annual report for your tax assessor. Now, get the kids involved. Get them out there chasing bugs. Get them out there getting their hands dirty digging holes. It's going to be a really good thing for them to have that connection and start opening their eyes and start learning about pollinators. Okay? Because again, remember, pollinators are in trouble. We have to do little things like this to help them out. Well, I've hoped you learned a little thing about pollinators today, and if there's any questions, now's the time to ask them.
So, first question I have is, what kind of plants are the best for use in grass?
Anything that's native, that flowers, is going to be the best for our area here in Central Texas. So you're going to think about things like salvias, foxgloves, skullcap. The list really goes on and on and on. And don't just concentrate on your flowers, like your traditional wildflowers. Think about your flowering shrubs too. I mentioned that agarita before, but tubular flowers like on your buckeyes are really important for the birds. Your agaves are really important for your bats. Okay? So it really kind of depends on the species you're going for.
Can we talk about the certain flower colors and if pollinators prefer certain colors?
Yes, I can. That's a really good question because insects especially don't see the way we do. They pick up different infrared cues, which means the color of that flower can really determine if they actually go and pollinate that flower or not. So when you think about our native bees, a lot of our native bees are attracted to highlighter yellow. Okay? So think about what color pollen is, right? So if you have this nice, like a black-footed daisy, you have this nice outer flower, the petals are white, and then what color is the inside? Highlighter yellow, right? And then the same thing with those blue flowers too. And that's going to change based on species and target as well.
And lastly, after I've planted my grassland, how long will it take for pollinators to find it?
That is really a really good question. It's really hard to answer, but basically it depends. It depends how connected your corridor is for those animals to come through. We have some people that get frustrated here on the ranch who try to establish pollinator gardens, but you're going to get pollinators coming through, but the whole ranch is a big giant pollinator garden. So you're more likely to attract pollinators quickly if you don't have as much native range around you. But don't get frustrated, because if you build it, they will come. The first step is always going to be building it and a diversity. Diversify your assets, diversify your rangeland, diversify your pollinator gardens.
All right, well that was pretty exciting. Thank
Sure
you for joining our session of Leopold Live. Again, we'd like to thank all those speakers and those that participated with our session. Look for upcoming sessions over the course of the next year, and our hope is to cover these very specific topics that are of interest to landowners and natural resource managers.
That's right. And I'd like to thank once again the Natural Resources Institute for coming out here and helping us provide this valuable information. At Bamberger Ranch Preserve, we hope to have our programming, including our workshops and tours, back up and running by the fall, depending on how things go. So make sure to watch for both the Texas A&M Natural Resources Institute and Bamberger Ranch Preserve on your social media channels, and make sure to check in every once in a while and see what we're up to.